of the present. Let go of desire. Let go of fear.
Science fact, science fiction, love it all. Especially the strange. The less explainable.
Nikki.
He grabbed me.
We're supposed to save the future, but we might have just doomed it. We're witnessing the birth of a new queen.
The true sovereign of nature, giving life, allowing life. And yet we know will be the thing that one day swallows us all. What is this? What is this banging?
Agnes, how will you survive without me?
I assume a lecture on the futility of resistance is not going to be necessary.
Am I dreaming? Or is this a nightmare? And I am here to save Earth. To save the entire galaxy, in fact. But to do so, it seems I need your help.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Carlos Phoenix, and now you are listening to the Garage Podcast, a show that explores the world of entrepreneurship and the people that bring that against all odds success. And my name's Carlos Phoenix again. On this episode, we're going to be talking to producer, writer, director Joe Menendez, an award-winning writer, director, and producer of some great TV shows, some of which you've seen just now. Joe Menendez is a multi-genre veteran of drama, action, horror, sci-fi, comedy, family, and rom-com. So he's been working on all these different programs for a number of years. I wanted to get a chance to talk to him again. I've had him before in previous shows. And we're going to be talking about the topic of Garage, which is basically learning what, during the course of his life, what occurrences happened to make him basically make the right decisions and how difficult it was to make those decisions. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here, man.
So I'm a huge fan. Every time I hear that you're going to direct a show, I literally schedule myself to like opening day to watch. And I also brag to the family, like, I know the guy who does this type of stuff. So, and I enjoy it because I love your method of storytelling. So we've had this discussion before, but today we're going to have a little bit different conversation. I want to know a little bit more about you as opposed to the programming that you do work on. And I want to start from an early childhood. So like me, as an example, I grew up unhealthy and, I had heart surgery and all that stuff as an infant. And so as I grew up, there was a lot of times when even my family was like, do we know if he's going to make it? And I got bullied and all type of stuff. So for me to become the artist that I eventually became and stuff, there was a lot of decision making, a lot of hardships, and family was involved. So going to you, what kind of things occurred when you were young that eventually started to influence what you have become?
Wow, it's a great question. Well, I was born in New York City, and I was raised in Hialeah, Florida, in the government projects. I grew up very, very poor. My parents were immigrants from Cuba, so we didn't have a whole lot as I was growing up. And when I was 7 years old, and I'm dating myself here, I went and saw Star Wars for the first time as a boy, and that movie sort of changed my life. And I wanted to know how that was made, where that was made, who made it, and I ever heard the word Hollywood. And my mother told me that word, and that word kept playing in my head. Hollywood. What is this? Where's this magical place there? They make movies and they make starships and giant creatures. Where is that place? Fascinated with it. Started to think about it all the time. But growing up in the projects, nobody's really talking about movie making. You're talking about living paycheck to paycheck, week to week. You're trying to figure out how you're going to survive. And I saw that as a kid. I saw my parents trying to survive every day, every single day. When we get to the end of the day and we were fed at the end of the day, that was a success for us growing up. So this whole idea of movies was just this side thing that they would humor me, pat me on the head, but off you go. And then in 1982, E.T. came out, and I read this article in the Miami Herald at 12 years old, where Spielberg sort of facetiously said that his biggest fear is that one day somebody will invent a machine that directs movies. And then he said, "What will I do for a living?" And that sort of stuck out of my mind because that's the first time that I saw, oh wait, being a director, wait, what? You can do this as a job. And up to that point, I started making Super 8 movies, with whenever I could scrounge some film together, and I would get my grandparents and whoever to buy me a roll of film and to process it later. So I had already developed a deep interest in making movies just based on Star Wars. And then now in 1982, I knew that it was a job. And so again, no contacts. Growing up in the projects, it's as far away from Hollywood as you can get. What I fixated on was I don't have any contacts. I don't know anyone in Hollywood. All I could do is work on figuring out how to do this thing, how to direct.
You develop the skill.
And I read. Pardon?
Develop the skill.
Correct. And that's all I had in my control. And so these were the days obviously before the internet. So I spent countless hours at our local library reading every book that was on the shelf about making movies, about making television shows. And I kept making my own Super 8 movies. And then I made movies on VHS tape all through high school, just obsessed with all things directing and how two shots link together and how that creates an emotion, how that tells a story. And then when you link 3 shots and 4 shots together, how that creates a mood and an emotion. It became an obsession to want to make movies. But in the meantime, it was just like I had to work, and I had to get a part-time job, and I had to, my family life growing up, it was very unstable in my house. My father wasn't someone that could be relied on to have a job. So I had literally every single odd that you could stack against someone. Those were all stacked against me. All I had was this sort of blind determination that I was gonna go to Los Angeles and I was gonna become a director someday. And at 22 years old, I finally left my hometown of Miami, Florida, and moved to Los Angeles. No contacts, didn't know anybody, and just started pounding the pavement with all my little short films that I had made in Miami. And, in those days they were on VHS tape. And I had to show that around and try to, and it's just, and I'm simplifying a much larger story because this was a long time ago, but it was dogged determination to have people watch the things that I had made and then continue to make more films, because it wasn't like I landed in Los Angeles fully formed as a filmmaker. I still had a lot of growing to do. I still had a lot of craft to perfect. And I became obsessed with it because where I lacked in contacts and I lacked in money, I couldn't lack in just an absolute willingness to be better than the person next to me. And I think that was sort of, in very broad strokes, that's sort of the types of decisions that I made. I had to get myself out of the projects because I had nothing to fall back on. And I moved to Los Angeles and I had to become a director, which meant I had to compete with people that had resources and contacts that I didn't have, which meant that I had to get better than they were so that one day I was undeniable.
So you're saying that Star Wars and E.T. and films of that nature were the influence. There was no family members that show like any kind of creative, anything? Like I'll give you an example. My father used to work in advertising in Colombia, South America. He didn't do it here, but to some extent we knew it was in my blood. So when I was 15, I worked at an ad agency. Was there any family member that you were like, you know what, I want to be like my Uncle Jim or anything like that?
No, not really.
Wow.
There was nobody in my family. I came from a very blue collar sort of working class family. There wasn't music and books about art and things like that in my house. It just didn't exist. We were all about survival. It was about living day to day. I mean, honestly, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about art in my house. That being said, I have a great aunt who has passed away, who became a big star in Mexico, a big movie star in Mexico. She left Cuba in the 1940s, if I'm getting the timeline right, and went to Mexico and became her name is Dinon Sevilla. And she became a gigantic star in Mexico during the sort of golden era of Mexican cinema in the 40s and 50s. But I didn't know her. I didn't know anything about her. She certainly wasn't somebody that we spoke about. The only reason I even knew about her, the first time I heard her name, was my parents happened to be watching some channel in Spanish, and one of her movies came on, and my mother said, "Who does that look like?" And I remember looking at this movie star in black and white dancing, because she was a big dancer, like a big rumbera dancer.
Nice.
And she looked like my aunt. And I was like, "That looks like my aunt." And she's like, "No, that's your tia abuela. That's your great aunt." And she's, that was when making movies in Mexico. But in my immediate home, there was no art. There was no music. There was none of that stuff. There wasn't discussing. Wasn't analyzing film. There wasn't anybody in my immediate family, and certainly in my outer circle of uncles.
Well, what about like friends from school or anything like that?
No, it was. I grew up in Hialeah, and there, it very like tough guy crowds, and so if you were somebody that was dabbling in the arts, they would they'll look
pick
at
on
you
you.
questionably. Now that being but I will say that when I was in elementary school, I was selected to be tested for the gifted program, and because I was drawing at the time, and I still draw to this day. But we
gotta compare some drawings.
Yeah, we should. Well, you definitely will win after you hear the story. I took the gifted test, and the test was basically, it was a bunch of panels. It was like 9 panels per page with like a squiggly line or whatever. And so the idea was you take that squiggly line and you create a drawing out of it, like whatever shape. It was an S or an
I remember
whatever.
those.
It was a jagged. And you had to create something, and then you had to name it. And I was buzzing right along. And I remember the panel. It was a panel with like what looked like a little M. It was like this, right? And so I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do with this little M. I'm going to draw Dracula, and I'm going to have that little the little spike of the M be the widow's peak. I was drawing Dracula's face, and he was cocking an eyebrow, and I remember that I messed up on the drawing, and they gave us the pencils without erasers, so we weren't allowed to erase. You had to figure out, it was just like they set you up so that to see how you respond, and I responded poorly, and they even said, don't get fixated on any one panel, move on to the next panels. I didn't finish the test because I was so obsessed with getting that one panel. Time up. They looked at my test. I didn't finish it. I didn't make the gifted program. Interestingly, in junior high, I met a bunch of my age that were in the gifted program, and they were also making little movies. And so
that's cool.
That was it. Like I hung around with them a little bit as people who were making movies, but we were sort of like the Stranger Things kids. We were like in a basement doing this stuff, so that we wouldn't get our ass kicked.
No, I can totally relate to that. But I will say being in New York was a blessing for me because I went to the High School of Art and Design, and eventually I went to both FIT and School of Visual Arts. So, fortunately there's a pathway in respect to the arts. Florida has Full Sail and a few other schools. Georgia has SCAD. And so I'm glad that there's locations throughout the United States that can help people kind of start at least getting on the path. Yeah. So when you wanted to start getting on your path, and you probably had conversations with your parents, how were those conversations met? Were they like, oh, come on, stick with reality, get a real job type of stuff? Or was there like any encouragement of, you know what, whatever you want to do, we're going to back you up?
It was a little bit of both, to be honest. Like they were very confused by the idea that I wanted to be a director. It was, they didn't know directors. They knew cops and firemen and lawyers and dentists, pharmacists. They knew those people. They didn't know any directors. So this was very baffling to them. But my mother was a bit more of the you can do whatever you want kind of person. Like just put your mind to it and you got to figure it out. I mean, she was terrified of what Hollywood was, and my old man was like a two-fisted tough guy. Was very much like but then would like bought me a Super 8 movie camera, and and like 1 year, like I was already obsessed with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and their first biographies were published sometime in the early 80s. And this was the days before Amazon, the days before Barnes and Noble and all that. And I just said to him, all I wanted for Christmas was those two biographies about those two filmmakers. And on Christmas morning, there it was. He somehow found the two books.
Nice.
So like it was a lot of like, I don't know what this stuff is and this movie making and all this, but like weirdly, the stuff that I wanted was there when I needed to. So it was a little bit of like, I don't understand this crap, but So,
hey, look, being a parent in itself is tough, especially around that time period. You're Latino, so that had some other implications. I don't know how much being a Latino affected you in terms of this storyline that we're listening to, but I don't. I guess for me, I don't think it did, but growing up now, I see where there could have been some bigger strides. Has that affected you in any way?
Well, I mean, what I didn't have was the contacts. I mean, Hollywood at the time that I was coming, in the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a movement afoot to try and get more Latinos in front and behind the camera. Just around the time that I was getting to Los Angeles in 1992. But there wasn't a whole lot of representation, if you will. So it was, I never thought for a moment that my being Latino would even be something that would be a positive. In fact, I thought when I moved to Los Angeles that I would have to sort of bury and dismiss my ethnicity. And so, for me, I spent, and this was now, it's a very different industry now than it was 30 years ago when I moved out here, when I moved to Los Angeles. it's really changed, and now there's a sort of almost a hunger and a thirst for diverse voices now. In particular, in the last 5 or 6 years, it's really become something amazing to see this thirst for diverse voices. What's happened is diverse voices are being sought, right, and a lot of times even being hired prior to them being fully ready and fully formed. Had I been plucked out of obscurity when I first moved to Los Angeles, I think I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have been able to deliver the sort of quality work that I can deliver now, because I spent many years honing my craft. And so that's all that I could do back then. I couldn't rely on anything else other than I gotta make the work better. I gotta make the work better. So the only thing that being Latino worked against me was in that that wasn't the industry wasn't something that looked like me when I got there. But I didn't look at it. I mean, and I knew that. Like, you go in and you just look around and okay, there aren't many people that speak Spanish around here. I wasn't discouraged by that. I wasn't intimidated by that. I just saw it as what it was, and I was like, all right, well, that's what it is, and now I've got to get my foothold. I've got to figure out my way into all this, and my path is different than anybody else's path. And I, again, as I've said before, I was like, my choice was to just focus on craft and not so much on my surname, which was very obvious what I was. But yeah, the industry did not look like I back then.
So you're in Hollywood. You're there for about how much time before you finally had your first opportunity?
Well, the moment that I moved to Los Angeles and I really started to hustle, and I was constantly trying to hustle, and I wrote things and I made short films. I made a short film when I was 24 that eventually got the attention of a show called Real Stories of the Highway Patrol. So I was hired at 25 to fly all over the country directing reenactments, and it was sort of like little tiny reenactments of actual crimes, and they were car chases, shootouts, and things like that. And it was sort of the first 2/3 of the show was a ride-along show. The last third of the show was a reenactment show. And I was hired to direct reenactments for the show. I was amongst a roster of directors that was doing this. And so that was my first directing job. It took about 3 years. And in that same year, when I turned 25, which was a pivotal year, I also wrote for HBO. HBO at the time was, they started a series called Happily Ever After, Stories for Every Child. And it was basically a retelling of all the classic fairy tales ethnically. And so I was hired to write the Latino version of Cinderella for this show. So that was sort of back-to-back. It was like a back-to-back thing. Like, I did the HBO thing, and then I started working on and then I made my film, and I started working on Real Stories of the Highway Patrol right around that time. So it took about 3 or 4 years before I started sort of seeing the ideas start to pay dividends, which seems fast, but in my head, to get to where I am now, it seemed like it took forever. But
I can imagine.
In hindsight, looking back, those were the first opportunities. Those were the first stepping stones. So it was about 3 years from the moment I moved to Los Angeles to the moment I got my first opportunity.
All right. So in most normal jobs, if we can use the word normal, you apply. They ask for your degree. They check your schooling. They see what kind of experience you have. So in those 3 years, what did you show off to them that made them say, I mean, I know you got the VHS tapes and that type of stuff, but what do you think made them say yes?
Well, the interesting aspect of the entertainment industry is that no one will ever ask for your degree. In 30 years that I've been, 30 plus years that I've been in the industry, I've never once been asked for a degree. I've never once been asked where you went to school. It's come up in conversation, after I've had the job, and I'm on set. Somebody in passing was like, "Hey Joe, where'd you go to school?" And I'll tell them I dropped out of community college. Like I did not. I don't have any. In fact, when I did a couple of years in college, and it was not something that that was made for me, to be frankly honest, because I had been making movies for so long as a kid, in high school, that by the time I got into college, I already knew the stuff that was being taught. Like a lot of the students in that sort of first semester in freshman year were literally learning, like, this is the camera, this is the lens, and this is what happens when light enters the lens. And I was like, I already know all this stuff. And so I was able to convince the professors to sort of let me skip ahead. I became a teacher's assistant and everything because I was sort of, advanced in college because I had already been doing it. And so that afforded me a lot of opportunities because I was able to have access to the 16 millimeter equipment, and I was able to make my 16 millimeter movies earlier than other students were because I already had a sort of, leg up on them because of my experience in junior high and in high school. And so I made a number of films. So and then when I got to LA, as I mentioned, I made more films. And so all that they wanted to see was the work. When in Hollywood, when you say I'm a director, the first question after that would be, well, what have you directed? And they're going to want to see your work. And right now, you just showed a demo reel, my latest sort of sizzle. That's on my website. To this day, I still put these things together because I think it's important for people to see the work. Because ultimately, when my agents send out my website, they can look at the work.
I'm actually a fan of your edits of those reels. The music, you hear the voiceovers. So it's not like you just say, well, here's some clips. You put them in a particular way where in itself it's almost telling a story. So that's showing off your talent there too. Now,
that's the job. I mean, that's a job. So
absolutely.
Even if I'm putting together a system, I should be telling a story.
Absolutely. So I had my first show. You're my second episode. No offense. I tried to have you first, but what's interesting is there's something you said that in my first episode they said in respect to school. A friend of mine from Disney, we went to high school together, but after high school, we jumped in the professional world. Now I did go to college personally, but in college, what pulled me out of college was the work. And in my work, which was at that time oil painting and illustration, and then eventually working in films, art directing, building sets, and that type of stuff. You're right. They nobody ever asked. You kind of team up with people. You start kind of becoming part of the community, and they recognize you, and they know you have certain ethics or whatever, and they bring you in when there's another gig. Because it's almost like, I mean, that's come like the terminology is the gig. You almost don't never call it a job in my world. So. Yeah. Was there ever just a period that said, oh, well, I guess I got lucky for a couple of years because now it's dry? Did you ever just end up becoming like a waiter or anything like that? Or is it, or have you just been working since that started?
No, it was, even though I started, I got my first professional directing job, my first professional writing job at 25. It wasn't then consistent working as a writer-director from then on. There were certainly periods that I had to take sort of day jobs, until I could. It wasn't really until I was about, I would say until I was about 28, 29, no, it's about 27. Like there was a couple of years that it just like I had to do, not odd jobs, but odd jobs being editing, for instance, like because I learned how to cut on an Avid. So I was able to do some gig, if you will. I was able to gig some editing jobs, some freelance editing jobs here and there, and that sort of filled the gaps until I just made my living completely as a director.
Now, was it the Media 100?
Yeah, yeah. This was like I was an early adapter of Avid, so like this was like right when Avid was in its infancy. Like
Yes.
it was essentially when it was Lightworks,
It
and
was
it
what,
was
like
like
mid
Avid.
90s?
Yeah, 90. Like it was like I first got onto an Avid in 93 is when I first got 93 is when I first got onto an Avid.
So when I was working in film, I started to sneak out of it because I had a car accident, but I still wanted to stay in the industry. So I ended up taking a job at Broadway Video. I'm not sure if you're familiar who they are, but we used to edit Saturday Night Live. We used to edit Showtime commercials, trailers for like Terminator back in the day. And it was tape to tape, but then the Avid started coming in and I started learning on the Avid, the Media 100. And so there I was right off of Times Square, but I didn't have a lot of experience. So I was being taught. And so I had the night shift, the overnight shift. So I was like there from like 8 o'clock at night till the next morning. And that's what burnt me out. So when you started learning, did you buy the equipment? Because it was pretty expensive back in the day. Or did you just kind of get a job where they just had the editing suites and you kind of learned on your own?
Yeah, prior to doing prior to Real Stories, so when I was 22, 23, 24, in that sort of time frame, I was working I became an assistant editor and ultimately a promo producer for Fox in Latin America. And so
Cool.
that's where they had so I was cutting promos. By
me
the
too.
time I left Fox in America, I had been cutting a number of promos for a number of different movies and TV shows, but all on Avid. You would digitize the beta cams, and they would go into the Avid. You would cut out, it would go, and then
The D1s, the D2s,
yeah, the
the beta
digibetas
cams.
and
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I feel like we're going down memory lane.
I did that for 3 years, and that's where I learned Avid, and it was how to edit on Avid. It just to edit non-linear, because over the years, then if you know Avid, then you could do Final Cut, and if you know Final Cut, then you could do Adobe Premiere. It's all you could pretty much pick it all up kind of fast, and that sort of was early on my saving grace in those years in my sort of mid to late 20s when things would dry up, and I would go do an editing thing, and there you can't underemphasize or overemphasize how important it is to have this other skill set, because as much as I was very driven and I was very hyper focused on becoming a director, thank God I had this ability to be able to do this, because that paid the bills. Otherwise I would have been on a bus back to Miami.
So, okay, so now you're developing all these skills. Is there anything in particular that you could say, just kind of stepping outside the box and looking at yourself from a distance, that brought you the opportunities that you have? For example, were you the nice guy? Were you just, wow, his vision is just that outstanding? What are the traits that you think that maybe someone who's looking to get into this kind of field should be looking at and focusing on that can benefit them without having to figure it out the long way?
Yeah, well, it comes down to one word, which is branding. Once you figure out your brand, it really does sort of smoothen the road. But I didn't actually, ironically, figure out branding till much later in my career. Yet I've always been working, and I think that because it's two separate arguments, like or two separate discussions. Knowing your brand means knowing the kinds of stories that you want to tell, and knowing what kinds of stories you tell well. And sort of when you think of Michael Bay, you think of a certain brand. You think of Martin Scorsese, you think of a certain brand. You think of Walt Disney, you think of a certain brand. That's what we should all be doing ourselves. We should all be able to, if someone says Carlos Phoenix, I was like, I know that, I know it. Like, I get it. Like, it should just pop into your brain, who you are as an artist. Same thing with Joe Menendez. Now it's a genre guy who does sort of sci-fi, the kind of 1 hour and all that.
Okay.
I was all over the place early on in my career because, as you read in that whole list early on, I've done reality and comedy and rom-com and kids and, so who am I?
Right.
They couldn't pinpoint any one thing. So I think the thing that kept me working, even though my brand was all over the place, I was what I call occupationally promiscuous because I was just sort of taking whatever, right?
Okay.
Is that technically, when you watched anything that I made, it came together beautifully. It came together well. And so I was obsessed with, regardless of whatever medium I was in, regardless of whatever genre I was in, I was obsessed with then deconstructing it so that then I could do it really well. Never mind what I wanted to do. Because if you would have asked me, I would have said, I want to do Spielberg and 80s Amblin kind of things.
Right.
But it took me a long time to express that and just be able to say, this is my brand. But what I was doing is whenever I got a gig, is I said, well, how do I do this better than everyone else? And I figured out how to deconstruct it, I analyzed it to the point that I deconstructed it, and then I was able to create it on my own. So the thing that always, because I wasn't the guy that would come in with an ascot and a European cigarette and go, I have a vision. And I wasn't that guy at all. Again, my working class blue collar roots meant that I came into every project as a craftsman, which is, what do you need? I will build you that. And so the reputation that I formed was that I was someone that was reliable, that you could give me a script, and that not only am I going to deliver on time and on budget, but I am going to find moments in the script that will elevate it so that the episode or the movie has elements that people didn't think of on the page. That now when they see the final product, they are like, well, that wasn't on the page, and that's way better. So the thing that I developed was I was someone that was, again, I hate to use the word reliable because it's such a boring word, but reliable. I was someone that they could count on. I was someone that that they knew would deliver. And I was somebody that hired Joe. Joe will deliver on time and on budget, and his episodes cut together extremely well. And that was because I was upset.
Was there ever a time where you didn't want to be in that box of budget? Like right now there's Cameron with his films, which are ridiculously budgeted, and he basically went off on anybody who tried to kind of limit the budget and stuff like that. Lucas used to do something similar, although he started in the box in a budget, and he was able to kind of expand on it by just investing in his own films and being, a lot of people don't realize Star Wars, most of those films are completely independent. They're not, studio films, and
in
that's
particular Empire and Jedi. Empire and Jedi. Yeah, those were financed by Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, and whatever he made out of the first one, he reinvested in the second one. And I wouldn't be surprised if Cameron was doing the same thing. I just haven't read up on that. But was there ever a time that you just saying, you know what, why do they keep limiting my creativity? I need this to be grander than what they're allowing me to be. Has that occurred in your head, in your life?
100%. But I think it was more of a product of being in genres and mediums that didn't interest me personally. What's interesting is that when I did From Dusk Till Dawn in 2013, it was the first time in my career that I worked on a show that I would have watched even had I not worked on it. So in other words, up to that point, not even the Spanish language movie that I made for Lionsgate, not even, maybe some of the short films early on were things that I would have seen, but the Spanish language shows that I worked on, the kids shows that I worked on, the reality shows that I worked on, none of those shows I would have watched on my own. So I was working in in genres and on shows that personally didn't appeal to me, that personally weren't interesting to me. So, and they were all very sort of varying budget levels, you know, and or creatively would check with, because like I did Nickelodeon and Disney shows that had to be shot a certain way, and I couldn't do the thing that because it was like these were little half-hour cartoons, but with live action actors, basically. You know, like sometimes it was like we're just making a cartoon with live action with real people, and I would just do it because that's what was being asked of me. So you know, I again, as a professional, you know, I can't come into a show like Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide for Nickelodeon many years ago and try to be an artist. You know, you get hired on a show like that, and it's like, this is what the show is. This is what we want from you. I have to go, yes, got it, and then go deliver that. And if I can insert the moments of something that's fun for me, great. But it makes such a difference to end up working on something that you would watch. And that was the sort of spark in my look how late this was. 2013. This was 10 years ago. It was the first time that I'm like, what am I doing? I've been working on things that I wouldn't watch. And the moment I started working on things that I would watch, which is what I'm doing now with Kung Fu and Picard and Snowpiercer and places and shows like that, I'm now working on things. You know, the show I'm going to go do next is a show that I watch. It makes a world of difference.
Okay, so because I know you have time constraints, I want to be able to at least get this across. Because what you're mentioning right now is like a powerful dividing line. When you start going after these type of pursuits, when you want to pursue your passions type of thing, you kind of still in your head, you've convinced yourself that, oh, well, I'm making this decision, hence I will have full control of every decision I ever make from this point on. And you're basically throwing reality at us saying, no, it's still a business, it's still a job, it's still an industry, and you don't always have control. You have to do the job because it's a job. What do you think happened in that dividing line in terms of you showing off your chutzpah, your capabilities and stuff like that? And they said, you know what? The floor is yours, sir. You've earned it. Like, is that kind of what I'm getting, or was it something else? Was it something different?
No, I mean, every show, with a few exceptions, every show that I worked on was generally happy with the work I was doing. I think that when I started working on shows that I would watch personally, I think what changed with that is that I understood them in a way that I couldn't ever understand the other shows. What that does is this. Like you said, when you get hired, in my case, I'm a director, I get hired on a Disney show or on a Nickelodeon show. I'm not the core audience for it. I'm not the audience for it at all, right?
Right.
But now I have a script in front of me that I now have to interpret. That's my job. Not only do I have to interpret it, but now I have to do what the showrunner wants me to do. I have to do what, and if it's a place like Disney, there's a brand that I have to adhere to. So now I'm telling the story within the confines of what a ton of other people want. And then on top of that, I now have to understand the story that I'm telling so that it's as entertaining as possible for an audience that's not me. So now I have to put myself in the mindset, well, if I am a 9-year-old, would I find this funny? Would I find this too scary? Would I find this interesting? Would I tune out? And I'm constantly having to sort of have these out-of-body experiences trying to understand, would this audience understand it? When I'm doing Spanish language stuff, I don't watch Spanish language television, even though I speak perfect Spanish. I don't watch Spanish language movies. I've made 3 Spanish language movies. I work on, I don't know how many Spanish language shows. I have to think about that audience because that audience is not me. So I have to think about an audience who is there, who I am not part of that. So I have to now, as a professional, go, what is it that a Spanish language audience reacts to? What do they respond to? Oh, okay. So now I have to, that's how I'm going to tell this story. I have to then almost, it's almost like I become an anthropologist. Like I have to understand how this demographic works. and then apply it to my own storytelling so that then it works for them, but I get to do things that are interesting in it. Now, cut to me doing shows that I would watch. I'm no longer thinking about some other audience. I'm no longer thinking about this group or this group, because I am the group. So now what it does is it unburdens me of having to think about an audience and what they want and what they're going to react to, because I am the audience. So all I have to do is intuitively react to material and like react to a performance, react to a cut, react to a camera move, because I am the audience. And it makes a world of difference. And what's happened as a result is the shows now are seeing a change in the quality. Like, I always think the quality of the things I did, I would hope, was good. But what's changed is because I'm now doing shows that I am the audience, it's now given me, like, my storytelling has sort of, I don't want to say has gotten elevated, but because I'm telling stories for me, the people that I work for now are seeing a difference in the work itself, which means I am now, as a result, being given more autonomy. I've been given more freedom. I've been given more trust to tell the stories because they're seeing the results. They don't necessarily need to know that, well, the reason you're seeing the result and the reason that this episode of Star Trek turned out well is because I would watch Star Trek. I'm interested in the world. I know the world of Star Trek. I know Jean-Luc Picard. Like, I know the world. So when I'm on the set and I'm directing Patrick Stewart, I'm not like going like, I wonder what Trekkies would say, because I am a Trekkie. I would watch it and I'm like, Patrick Stewart. So now I am the audience. And so it changes how you tell the story entirely. And I think what's happened is it's transformed my career in a way that is exciting, because now I'm telling stories that I love in worlds that I love, on shows that I love, and it makes me, I think, a better filmmaker.
So, one, thank you so much for joining me. Two, I've been watching I was fortunate enough to interview you a number of years back. And, granted, we don't get to talk on the phone as often and this and that, but I get to visually see you grow, and it's been awesome. I become fans of the shows that you work on. Just to add one more drop of value, what do you feel in your trek, for lack of better words, in your adventure of basically growing as a filmmaker, what kind of things do you think affected the path to the point where, the way I see it, are major successes in your career? And I'm expecting even bigger ones, because it sounds like you're just beginning, based on the way you're describing it, in the getting to play in your new playground of doing projects that you want to be the audience for as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, geez, a great question, dude. A really great question. I think having because the old cliche of like, you got to love what you do and you have to have a passion for it. It's all so true. But I think in my case, I've always been, whether I was working in a genre that I loved, like I've been doing the last 10, 11 years, or in other genres where I wasn't the audience, but yet was still, I had the privilege of directing. There's a moment of bliss that a director, at least me, and I believe other directors feel this, but at least for me, there's a moment of bliss that occurs when you've read a script and images come into your brain as you read the script, and you write those down. At least I do. I write those first images, those first ideas. I write those down in the margins or wherever, and I find that those ideas are the most pure. And I hang on to those throughout the entire prep process. And I really are, those are the ideas that I really endeavor to create on set. And then when I create those on set, when I shoot those on set, in the editing, I put all those elements together. And there's a moment, dude, when you're sitting in an edit bay, or you're watching the cutback, And that initial spark, that initial thing that popped in your head, to one day see it completed, and you've tracked it from its conception and as an idea to then being a sequence that is complete. It is what it's all about. It's a moment of bliss. It's a moment of, it's cathartic. It's like, that thing that was in my brain is now there. And that's the high, I think, that I seek, and that I think any artist seeks. Because what is an artist? An artist is someone that sees things that no one else does, right? Or hears things that no one else does if you're a musician. And what is it that an artist is not struggling, but obsessing to do, which is to get that thing that's in our head, whether if you're doing pottery or you're sculpting, you've got a thing in your hand, you're chiseling to get the statue, or you're writing music, the notes that you hear in your head, or you're drawing that picture, that image, and that pose you see in your head, or in my case, the images and the edits and the sequences that I see when I read those words on a script. It's that bliss. That's the thing that we all want. And I think whether I'm working in a genre that I love, like I'm doing now, thankfully, or I was in other genres, like in the kids space or in the Spanish language space, that never changed. That's been the common denominator for 30 years, which is a chase of the bliss, a chase. I'm chasing that moment of euphoria when you're like, the thing that was in my head is now in front of me. And I think that's the thing that every artist can relate to when they see a work of art that was here is now there. And I think that's the moment that we all are thirsting for.
Awesome. Well, Joe, I know you got to go. I greatly, deeply appreciate every moment that you spend with me. I appreciate every time that you allow me to do this with you. I love seeing your talent. I love seeing the growth. I love knowing that it's not the end, or, don't want to sound morbid, but, I know that there's more, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Are there any particular projects that maybe you can drop some names that you're going to be working on?
Well, I did a couple episodes of Snowpiercer, which interestingly is sort of caught in this weird moment at Warner Brothers where it's not going to air on TNT like it was supposed to. Now it's sort of the final season of Snowpiercer is sort of in limbo as to where it's going to actually air. There's been this massive change at Warner Brothers, and so there's been a lot of have been sort of
shuffled.
Shuffled around, and Snowpiercer is one of them. So Tomorrow Studios, which is the studio that made Snowpiercer, is now shopping it around to a number of different venues. So I believe that'll end up finding a home. But it was on TNT. It was it's the fourth season of Snowpiercer. So there's no way that series is not going to find a home and be completed in earnest. Because the fourth season that I worked on it's a pretty phenomenal season. So I think it's gonna be pretty exciting. Some twists and some turns, and it's really emotional and exciting. And then I'm gonna go do a show for Paramount Plus called Evil next. Which I'm excited about. It's all about the paranormal and exorcisms and demons and things like that. So there's a lot of
fun. Hey, if you ever want to just have me, work with you on a project, anyway, that's another conversation for another day. Thank you so much, Joe Menendez. And I hope you guys who are watching have kind of listened in and picked on some great pieces so that you can kind of put into your life and know that, you heard the story. He starts from the garage, in New York City. And now he's doing what he loves. And that's the whole point. That's everything that we want to do and accomplish in our life to be happy. So thank you again, Joe. And I hope to have you again sometime in terms of coming on a podcast. And hopefully one day I'll make it to California and we can hang out a little bit like I do with Rick when he comes down here. Thank you. That's all I can tell you. Thank you. And I can't wait to see you getting awards because you definitely deserve them. And the talents that you work with, they're all fantastic.
Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it. It's always fun, dude. You're an amazing host, and you always ask amazing questions, and
Thank you.
I always have really riveting conversations with you. To me, they're always fascinating. So I hope your audience is as interested as I've been. You're really great at what you do.
I appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to end off with one of my favorite shows that you had done, and I love the storyline, Siren. I know it's been a few years for you, but I'm just going to play a couple of clips that you had on your website. And feel free to check out Joe's website, joemenendez.com. You'll see it splash on the video itself. And have a great day, everybody.
It's a trap, Ren. She's waiting for you.
Good.